On debate, Senator Plett.
Colleagues, I'm rising to speak to Bill C-275. But before I get to my comments about the report directly, allow me to set a little bit of context. Growing up in landmark Manitoba, the very, very center of the country, the very center of the country, for all those people in Toronto that think you're Central Canadian, you are not. Landmark Manitoba is Central Canada. And I grew up there, and it's an agricultural community. Later on, during my years in the plumbing industry, I worked with the sector, often doing installations of heating systems in barns, various outbuildings. The importance of agriculture and the need to be aware of its unique challenges have always been close to my heart. So when I was appointed to this chamber in 2009, I was delighted that the very first committee I was appointed to serve on was our Agricultural Committee. At the time, the Harper government wanted their senators to serve on committees where they had some expertise, kind of unique, unlike today when a housing developer with no ag background can be on an ag committee. We actually needed to know something about ag. I sponsored every agricultural bill in the Senate during the Harper government. In the years that I served on that committee until I was appointed the leader of the opposition in the Senate in 2019. My time on AgFo ran concurrent with Senator Terry Mercer. I've used his name a few times in the Senate. I used to use his name when I was cursing. Lately, I've used it in a much more gentle and collaborative tone. Terry and I were very good friends. And he sat on the committee as well as a Liberal, and I as a Conservative. And yet, in spite of our opposing political views, we rarely disagreed at committee. There were a few exceptions, such as the monopoly on the Canadian Wheat Board. But by and large, when it came to agricultural issues, everyone on the committee was united. We made it our job to understand the industry and find out what was good for agriculture. When we discovered that, we supported it. We were there because of our love for agriculture, our appreciation for producers, and our recognition that agricultural policy should support the ag industry, not tear it down. Colleagues, I know that Senator Gold says we're using talking points and we say the same thing. You say that many times. But colleagues, I truly, honestly feel those days are gone. Although I am no longer a regular member at AgFo, I sit on that committee occasionally, and I recently sat on the committee for the consideration of two different ag bills. The first one was a year ago on Bill C-234, the carbon tax exemption bill. And now, lately, the bill we are discussing today, Bill C-275, an act to amend the Health of Animals Act, biosecurity on farms. On both of these occasions, I found that I no longer recognized our Agricultural Committee. I felt like I was no longer sitting around the table with senators who wanted what was best for the agricultural industry. Some did for sure, and some still do. But too many of them are now advocating for their own special interest, or playing some kind of a weird power game rather than watching out for the best interests of producers and indeed the entire agricultural sector. In the committee study on both C-234 and C-275, when farmers, producers, and farm organizations came to the table and unanimously supported a position, I saw members of our Ag Committee treat them contemptuously. Instead of listening to witnesses, they lectured them. They treated them with hostility. Instead of trying to understand their position, they acted like skeptics and critics. Instead of guarding and defending the interests of agriculture in Canada, they took positions which were antagonistic toward the industry. This not only surprised me, colleagues, it alarmed me. I was shocked to see, and I'm sorry to say, that the Senate Agriculture Committee of today is no longer a friend of farmers. And Senator Walden alluded to that already earlier in her speech from the throne. With Bill C-234, the agricultural community from coast to coast was unanimously asking for a simple change to the carbon tax, which would exempt propane and natural gas from the carbon tax in the same way that gasoline and diesel were already exempted. They were unanimous, colleagues. This would save producers millions of dollars, which could be put to good use by being reinvested in their farms or invested in cleaner technology. In some cases, it could very well be the difference between solvency and insolvency for their farming operation. However, as you may recall, the majority of the committee refused to listen to producers and instead amended the bill in a way which would ensure the bill would never become law. Under the guise of improving the bill, Senator Downe inserted a poison pill. Now, to its credit, the Senate as a whole rejected those amendments at report stage, and the bill was returned to its unamended state. And for a moment, I was hopeful. There's a light at the end of the tunnel. But then Senator Downe, together with his good friend Senator Wu, managed to convince this chamber to amend the bill again, knowing full well that if there were amendments, the bill would languish, which it's doing today. These amendments were passed by this chamber at third reading, and to this day, Bill C-234 sits on the order paper in the House of Commons and will likely never become law because of it. Farmers never got the much-needed relief from the carbon tax that most Canadians in this chamber claim they wanted farmers to receive. That, colleagues, was December 12, 2023, almost 1 year ago. Today, the bill continues to languish in the other place, and I will not be surprised if it lies there until the next election, which, of course, we're all hoping, some of us more than others, that that will be soon, and then this bill will die, and a common-sense Conservative government will bring this back, and it will become law. So there is hope for these farmers. You will not be part of giving them that hope. Those of you who voted the way you did will not be part. You will not be able to accept credit for them getting that hope. Colleagues, today we are in the exact same situation with Bill 275. Bill C-275 seeks to add additional legal protection for farmers in order to mitigate biosecurity risks introduced by unauthorized visitors. Note the word unauthorized visitors, better known as trespassers. It proposes amendments to the Health of Animals Act, which would make it an offence for individuals to enter without lawful authority into areas where animals are kept, if such entry could expose the animals to diseases or toxic substances. It introduces stricter penalties for trespassers and recognizes the potential biosecurity risks that unauthorized entries pose to animal health and, by extension, to the Canadian food supply chain. This bill is an unapologetic response to increasing concerns over farm trespassing incidents across Canada involving animal rights activists. These incidents not only compromise the biosecurity of farms, but also impose significant stress on farm operators, threatening both animal welfare and the country's food security. Action, colleagues, is needed to protect our agricultural producers and their livestock, and this legislation provides exactly that, or at least it did before the Ag Committee got a hold of it. Colleagues, biosecurity threats to Canadian farms are not hypothetical. They are real and present dangers. Diseases like African swine fever, avian influenza, and others pose significant risk to animal health and to the agricultural economy. An outbreak of ASF in Canada, for example, could result in a $34 billion economic hit to the pork industry, affecting thousands of jobs in export markets. Moreover, the mental health impact on farmers due to trespassing and potential biosecurity breaches cannot be overstated. Incidents of unauthorized entries have left farm families distressed, impacting their livelihoods and well-being. The necessity of Bill C-275 lies in its potential to serve as a deterrent against such activities, protecting farms from biosecurity risks and supporting the mental health of farm operators. At committee, agricultural producers vigorously supported this bill as much-needed legislation. Matthew Atkinson, president of the Canadian Cattle Association, said this: "Trespassers on beef cattle farms, ranches, and feedlots are a biosecurity hazard. The proposed amendments to Bill C-275 would provide a targeted intervention to this on farm food safety and biosecurity risk by limiting the access of unauthorized entrants to animals and their feedstocks." Darren Ference, chair of Turkey Farmers of Canada, said, "Bill C-275 is a critical piece of legislation that will strengthen biosecurity as well as safeguard animal health and welfare and the safety of farm personnel. As a turkey farmer, deeply committed to the welfare of my animals and the success of our industry, I urge you to support this bill and work towards its swift enactment into law." Colleagues, the challenge of protecting biosecurity is neither theoretical or aspirational. The implementation of formal biosecurity protocols in Canadian agriculture has been a long-standing and ongoing process that gained significant momentum in the late 1980s and early 1990s. Today, strict biosecurity protocols are in place for avian farms, the bee industry, beef cattle farms, cervid industry, dairy farms, the equine industry, goat industry, mink industry, sheep industry, and the swine industry. But while biosecurity protocols exist at all levels, including regional, national, and international, it is important to realize that the responsibility of farm-level biosecurity rests with farmers themselves, as noted by CFIA. Biosecurity may be considered as a whole farm approach to animal health management. The cooperation of visitors and agri-service personnel is an important part of a plan, but ultimately the owner or manager must be willing to do what is necessary to ensure that established protocols are followed by family members, employees, and visitors. Critics of this bill like to say that this means biosecurity measures are voluntary, but this presents an inaccurate picture. Biosecurity on farms is as voluntary as locking or not locking your doors in a high crime neighborhood. It's your choice, but no one cares about their property or the safety of their loved ones. No one who cares about the property or cares for their loved ones or the safety of their loved ones would fail to do so. Furthermore, industry associations have integrated biosecurity protocols into their mandatory on-farm programs, including the Dairy Farmers of Canada, the Chicken Farmers of Canada, the Turkey Farmers of Canada, and the Pork Council of Canada. The protocols are mandatory if a producer wants to continue accessing the market for their products, which means anyone who does not abide by them will quickly be out of business. Nothing voluntary there. It is the producer who bears all of the responsibility and all of the risk for biosecurity at the farm level, and it is something that they take seriously. I have witnessed firsthand in my previous life that I talked about earlier. We did an awful lot of work on hog farms, being in Manitoba, which is one of the large hog-producing areas in the country. My men would tell me, I no longer have to shower before I come to work. because I'm going to have 5 or 6 or 7 showers during the course of the day. They would have to shower when they got to the farm before they would be allowed to walk into the barn. They would have to shower when they walked out of the barn to get a pair of pliers or a screwdriver from the truck that they may have forgotten. Then they would have to shower again when they walked back into the barn. We also owned a truck and trailer wash where we did a lot of washing of farm vehicles that regularly came to our farm to wash their trucks before they were allowed to go to another farm. They had to be washed and disinfected. Farmers take this seriously. They are trying to do everything they can to make sure that nothing happens. And then we say, well, let's not penalize trespassers. Biosecurity protocols are significant and rigorously enforced by producers. And yet, at this point, farmers still do not have the tools necessary to ensure compliance with those protocols. They can enforce the protocols with their employees, family members, visitors, but they are helpless in one key area: individuals who come to their farm without authorization. In other words, trespassers. At committee, there was a fixation with the idea that the bill should apply to everyone, not just trespassers. The argument was made that the sanction imposed in Bill C-275 should also apply to anyone legally present on the farm. And regrettably, an amendment was made to that effect. Think about that, colleagues. What the amendment did was remove 5 words from Clause 1, as passed by the House. The bill had previously read, "No person shall, without lawful authority or exercise, enter a building or other enclosed place in which animals are kept, or take in any animal or thing if they are entering such a place or taking in the animal or thing could reasonably be expected to result in the exposure of the animals to a disease or toxic substance that is capable of affecting or contaminating." The amendment removed the words "without lawful authority or excuse." This was proposed by a judge. And in doing so, it made the sanctions in the Act apply to not just persons who were present without lawful authority or excuse, but to everyone. This includes producers themselves, their own employees, their temporary foreign workers, visitors, family members, delivery drivers. This, colleagues, is misguided, misdirected to the point of being malicious. Producers who, as I said earlier, currently carry all of the responsibility and all of the risk for a biosecurity outbreak are already highly motivated to prevent one. Yet, should they find themselves in the unfortunate situation where through their own lapse in judgment or error they cause a biosecurity incident, they would now be facing fines of up to $25,000 or 3 months in jail or both on summary conviction. On an indictable offense, the punishment would be a fine of up to $100,000 or 1 year in prison or both. And this is in addition to the financial, emotional, and mental impact of the biosecurity incident on their operation. And we had 7 senators vote in favor of that, colleagues. 7 senators. At committee, Senator Downe claimed that since he grew up on a farm, he was representing farmers by introducing this amendment. Yet in this very same breath, he acknowledged that at one point his own father lost thousands, this is a quote, lost thousands of chickens because of a sickness that contaminated not only one, but many buildings. Senator Downe's words. "I know what security is," he went on to say. "I know it's an important risk. And I know who pays at the end of the day. It was not the government. It was my father." I agree with that. But by some strange logic, Senator Downe said this in defense of his amendment that he introduced. which, if it was law during the biosecurity incident of his very own father's farm, his father could have seen a fine of up to $100,000 and spend a year in jail for that outbreak. His very own father. And it had already cost him dearly. This is the lunacy of this amendment. It does not help the agricultural sector. It hurts it. It is like amending a bill meant to punish home invaders, but instead of making it apply to homeowners who accidentally leave their door unlocked, imagine facing criminal charges and potential jail time because you forgot to double-check your own door, on top of already dealing with the trauma and losses from the break-in itself. That is not just missing the point of the legislation, it is actively punishing the very people the law is supposed to protect. Senator Downe may have grown up on a farm, but he certainly does not understand agriculture. Bill C-275 was drafted to protect farmers. Senator Downe's amendment to the bill destroyed that intent and instead targets producers themselves instead of protecting them. It now threatens them. Senator Downe gave 2 reasons for making this amendment. No, actually, let me correct that. He gave 3 reasons. The first one, and this is ironic, the first one was that he felt it would somehow force me to speak to Bill C-355 on his timetable. I'm not clear how he expected this to play out, but he seemed to think this amendment put me in some kind of a hammerlock. He even clipped that portion of the committee hearings and tweeted it, which was then promptly retweeted by the animal rights activists. My office has been fielding phone calls ever since, patiently trying to explain parliamentary procedure to the callers. On that point, it's interesting to note that some of those calls have been coming from the United States. One caller from New York told my office that animal rights groups in Canada had contacted their counterpart organizations in the U.S. and asked them to mobilize their members to call my office. I guess if you do not have enough support for your own movement at home, you will beat the bushes to try to find it somewhere else. Senator Downe had 2 other reasons for making this amendment. One, because of a concern that the bill exceeded federal jurisdiction, and 2, because he claimed it would do more to strengthen biosecurity protections. Those may sound like good reasons until you realize that they are unnecessary and that the amendment actually endangers the entire bill, promising to leave the ag community with nothing instead of something. Allow me to explain, beginning with the question of jurisdiction. I hope there will be some people that will speak to this later that will explain this even better, and I'm sure there will be. But I will take a stab at it. This concern has been raised repeatedly under this bill, and when it was introduced by MP John Barlow in its earlier form on as Bill C-205, during the debate over Bill C-205, the government opposed the legislation, partly due to jurisdictional concerns. But with Bill C-275, the government ended up supporting the bill after the Conservatives introduced an amendment at committee which addressed this concern. MP Francis Drouin, the parliamentary secretary to the Minister of Agriculture, said this during his second reading speech on Bill C-275. This amendment would mitigate against the legal issues I outlined earlier by shifting the focus to entry into on-farm biosecurity zones. It would bring the bill under federal jurisdiction because it would be more clearly related to agricultural options inside the farm gate. It would also reinforce the benefit of biosecurity zones, which are an important part of agricultural practices to prevent the spread of animal disease. Senator Downe's amendment addresses concerns which were raised in the House of Commons and addressed to the satisfaction of the government that Senator Downe is supporting. The bill ended up passing the House by a wide margin with, colleagues, listen to this, 133 Liberals, 112 Conservatives, 30 Bloc, and 3 Independents. Colleagues, that's a total of 278 elected members of Parliament, including the Prime Minister and all of his cabinet, including the current and former Ministers of Agriculture. Wow. Colleagues, at committee, Joseph Melenchenko, Senior Counsel with the Agricultural and Food Inspection Legal Services from the Department of Justice, was present to aid us in our deliberations. And I asked him this question: would you have advised the government on the constitutionality of this bill? Simple question. His answer: yes. The Department of Justice looks at constitutional issues in support of government witnesses that appear at this committee. Colleagues, this means that we can be certain of 2 things. 1, he advised the government on the bill's constitutionality, and 2, the government ended up supporting the bill. Thus, it is obvious that, as explained by MP Francis Trewin, the bill, as amended by the House of Commons, is constitutional in the government's view. The constitutional question was settled. 278 members of the House of Commons agreed, but Senator Delfond did not.
Wow.
This leaves Senator Delfond's second argument that the amendment will somehow motivate producers to be more vigilant about implementing and enforcing biosecurity protocols on their farms. This, as I already explained, colleagues, is nothing short of frivolous and vexatious. Producers already carry all of the risk and all of the responsibility for biosecurity. They do not need a legislative gun to their head to convince them. Such a rationale shows how out of touch Senator Delfond and some other members, 6 of AGFO committee members, are with the agriculture industry and its producers. Colleagues, there is only one group of stakeholders who support this amendment. Only one group of stakeholders that support this amendment, colleagues. That is the animal rights activists, their lawyers, and their university professors. The animal rights activists have been very active on this file, and their reason for doing so is simple. They raise hundreds of thousands of dollars off of it, and they want to be able to continue to illegally enter farms, barns, feedlots, boiler houses, hatcheries, farrowing houses, and any other agricultural facility that they decide to invade. They claim that they have a greater interest in animal welfare than the very people whose future and livelihood depends on the welfare of these animals, the producers themselves. The real agenda of the animal rights activists is no secret, colleagues. It is to eventually shut down livestock farming in its entirety by the death of 1,000 cuts. Their objective is not to improve this bill, but to defeat it. But colleagues, if you doubt me, perhaps you will believe the animal rights activists themselves. Let me quote from an email that Animal Justice sent out on October 25th, right after Senator Delfond amended the bill, right after. This is what it read, colleagues. Dear supporter, we are so excited to share this week's achievement with you. Bill C-275, a federal agricultural gag bill that attempted to punish people for exposing animal suffering on farms, has just been dealt a major blow in the Senate. Critically, the Senate Agricultural Committee amended the bill so that it no longer targets animal advocates. Now the bill ensures that farm operators who cause disease outbreaks can be held to account for failing to protect animals against biosecurity risks. Now listen very carefully to this part. This is the end of it. You kept the pressure on and spoke up for animals. And this amendment is a giant nail in the coffin of this dangerous proposed law. This amendment is a giant nail in the coffin of this dangerous proposed law, and yet Senator Delfond and Senator Veroni and Senator Pate and others say this bill helps, this amendment helps. Make no mistake about it, colleagues, the object of the animal rights activists is to kill this bill, and they are using Senator Delfond and 6 other senators who voted in favor of this amendment to do that. Senator Bernard, Senator McBean, Senator Pate, Senator Petitclerc, Senator Simons, and Senator Veroni. These are the senators who helped the animal rights activists put, and I quote, a giant nail into the coffin of this dangerous law, because the activists do not want to be impeded by heavier consequences for trespass and risking the health of the very animals they pretend to care about. At committee, Senator Simons acknowledged that this amendment could very well kill the bill, and she said, and I quote, "If we amend this bill, given current political climate, there's a good chance it may not come back out of the House." And then shamefully, she went on to suggest that such an outcome should have no bearing on how senators voted on the amendment because, in her words, it's not our fault or our problem. What are we doing here, colleagues? What is our problem? What is our responsibility? It's not our fault and not our problem. Well, I'm sorry, senators, but it is the fault of those very senators unless we kill this report. It is the fault of those senators and anybody who votes for this report who supported this amendment at committee, and it will be the fault of every senator in this chamber who does not vote to overturn this report. And I would add that if the problems facing agriculture are not our problem, then let me suggest, those of you who believe it, you should certainly not be sitting as a member of the Senate Standing Committee on Agriculture and Forestry. If agricultural and farmers are not your problem, what are you doing there, colleagues? Find a committee that you believe in. I cannot help but wonder whether these senators, particularly when a large housing developer from Toronto, would be happy if people trespassed on his property. And yet he comes to a committee one time, substitutes, and casts the deciding vote, the last vote, to amend this bill. Like I asked animal justice lawyer at committee, I would like to know from senators who supported this amendment. If I had evidence that you were treating your pet dog, this is what I asked, I asked the animal justice lawyer at committee this question. If I had evidence that you were treating your pet dog in a bad way in your house, do you think it would be okay for me to come, pry open your window and crawl into your living room and take pictures of you mistreating your dog? Or would that be trespassing and should I be charged for it? Because that's what we're saying is okay for these trespassers. This is the kind of behavior that is being enabled by these senators. The amendment they supported is going to put a giant nail in the coffin of Bill C-275. And remember, those were not my words. They were the words of animal justice. Colleagues, the agenda of the animal rights activists is not ambiguous. It is crystal clear. Although they claim to promote animal welfare, this is little more than an undisguised effort to incrementally impose the worldview on every Canadian with the help of witting and unwitting parliamentarians. To put it bluntly, animal rights activists do not believe that any animal should be in captivity, period. And as Senator Wall stated earlier, and this isn't verbatim, but we don't get our food from Safeway, we get it from the farms. To put it bluntly, animal rights activists do not believe that animals should be held in captivity, period. It is not simply about elephants and great apes. It is about freeing every single animal in zoos and farms and no longer seeing animals killed for human consumption. You may find this hard to believe, so allow me to quote from the 3-year strategic plan of animal justice, beginning with their vision, which says it plainly, colleagues. Animal justice's top priority from 2023 to 2025 is protecting farmed animals because of their numbers and extent of suffering. In 2022, over 841 million land animals were killed for food in Canada, a record high. An estimated 10 billion aquatic animals are also killed annually. Note the emphasis here, suffering does not mean being held in conditions which do not meet animal welfare standards. It means being held in captivity for any reason, and especially if the end use is killing those animals for human consumption. So colleagues, you better not go home and eat a steak this weekend or a piece of chicken because you don't want that to happen anymore. You want us to be rid of all of this. This, colleagues, is the constituency and the agenda which Senator Delfon's amendment panders to. But here's the counter-argument that the activists made a committee, in which Senator Delfon and his allies parrot. They claim that animal protection advocates have never caused a disease outbreak on a farm. So there is no need for this bill. This argument is so absurd that I should not even have to respond to it, but you know me, I will. For starters, although it is difficult to conclusively prove the precise origin of any outbreak, outbreaks following unauthorized entry have happened and have raised serious concerns that could have been caused by the activists who had just invaded the private property. The most recent example of this was in 2023 outbreak of avian influenza in Sonoma County, California, where a state investigation found that activists may have spread avian flu to a farm. Animal activists have tried to make the case that since the source of the outbreak cannot be conclusively proven with absolute evidence, that this incident should be ignored. This is both absurd and misleading. It suggests that even though having protesters illegally entering and trampling over your property, it is a possible vector of disease, it should be ignored because there is no absolute evidence. Even the California State Department of Food and Agriculture noted that while there is no absolute evidence, it was plausible that the virus was introduced to that farm during those incidents. Furthermore, this risk of contamination was confirmed by the Quebec court decision in 2022, Port Greg Farm case, which found 11 animal activists guilty of break and enter, obstructing a peace officer, and mischief after invading a pigsty and refusing to leave. Although the prosecution was not able to conclusively prove that the activists caused the subsequent illness and death of several pigs that followed their invasion, the judge noted in his decision that such actions could cause the spread of viruses or diseases that could kill many pigs or even an entire herd. The risk is real and the consequences are severe. Suggesting there is no need to discourage risky behavior since that behavior has not yet conclusively resulted in an outbreak, colleagues, is like telling your children, or in most of our cases now maybe our grandchildren, you should not play with matches, because they have been playing with them for years and they haven't burned the house down yet. That's how absurd this is. It simply does not matter, colleagues, if there is a provable case of an outbreak or not. Nobody argues that the fact that an outbreak is a possible and plausible consequence of an illegal invasion of private property. We can argue about whether that risk is high or low, but it cannot be argued that the risk does not exist. Frankly, colleagues, anyone who supports activists storming into barns uninvited cannot honestly claim to be a supporter of animal welfare. Such activity does nothing but threaten the welfare of the very animals they claim to care about, with the potential of devastating results for both animals in those barns and those in the surrounding farms. Our agricultural community is asking that we pass this bill unamended to help them mitigate this risk. In closing, let me underscore again that Bill C-275 is meant to be preventative. One of the main goals is to deter unlawful behavior before that behavior results in disastrous consequences. And the fact that animal rights organizations are fighting so hard against it demonstrates that this bill will discourage them from unlawfully entering farms. The bottom line is that producers are already incentivized to follow biosecurity protocols. Trespassers are not, and therefore this legislation is needed. Senator Delfon's amendment is not needed to ensure the constitutionality of the bill or to make the impact of the bill on biosecurity protection stronger. This bill is supported, as we received it from the House, by producers, by agricultural organizations across the country, the government, current and former ministers of agriculture, by Animal Health Canada and the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. The exact same amendment, the very same amendment, made by Senator Delph on that committee was previously considered by the House of Commons Agricultural Committee, and it was rejected. Now listen to this, colleagues. Following the rejection of that amendment at third reading, this bill was passed by a vote of 278 to 36. 278 to 36. I want to just compare very quickly one other bill, and we're going to talk about that later on in the week. It was talked about today. The report was introduced today. Bill C-280. It's also been amended by some of the same senators. That bill was voted on in the House of Commons, and the vote was 320 to 1. 320 to 1. And we got a committee together here with 10 senators and they say, we know better. And then we have a senator, we say, that's not our problem and not our concern. And then we say we're legitimate. And then you wonder why we say the Senate isn't legitimate. Because you tell us time and again how independent you are and that you're not on the side of anybody. Well, are you on the side of farmers? How can we in a democratic society, even if we believed we should have voting rights like they do in the House of Commons, even if we believe that, we must believe in a democracy. So let's say we were all united, every one of us believed the same thing. There is no dissension in this chamber, and we had a full Senate of 105. The vote on 275 would be 278 to 133. Which one should win, the 278 or the 133? If we voted on Bill 280, it would be 280 to 106. And yet we believe we have the right to do this, and we believe it's not our concern. Colleagues, we have an obligation to present good amendments, but when they have already been presented, 280, the same thing, it was presented in the other place. They turned it down. But we say, no, you guys don't know what you're talking about. And we aren't dependable on anybody. I read Senator Simon's article that she wrote, I'm not sure when she wrote it, but I read it today, where she says, we're not accountable to anybody. We're not beholden to anybody. We don't report to anybody. I don't know the words. I'm not going to stumble through this. But in essence, that is what she said. And we aren't beholden to what they're doing over in the other place. Colleagues, every one of those 280, 278, 320, those people, each and every one of them represent approximately 100 to maybe 130,000 people.
Voters.
Voters. Who are we representing? We don't represent them. Who are we representing? Who are we accountable to? Who do you answer to when you go home? I do know who I'm answered to, because I'm part of the caucus, and I'm proud of it. But if you aren't part of a caucus, that's fine too. But who are you accountable to?
Themselves.
To nobody?
Themselves.
Senator Simons, who says we're not at fault and it doesn't matter, who do you report to? Nobody, because you've been appointed. Nobody can kick you out of here. You've been here. Some of us have to be a little more careful because we're afraid that there could well be some move on to get rid of us before our time. That's been done in the past. I fortunately only got 8 months left, so by the time anything could be done, maybe I'd be gone because the Senate doesn't move that fast. But nevertheless, colleagues, we're accountable to somebody. All of us are. So maybe you're independent. Maybe you don't answer to the Prime Minister. Maybe you don't answer to the Liberal caucus. But you must answer to somebody. And how can 7 people, I don't care how smart they are, I don't care what their business is, I don't care what their background is, how can 7 people be smarter than the 278, which includes, by the way, the gentleman that put you all here? The person that appointed each and every one of you, whether you like it or not, he appointed you. He voted the right way on both of these bills. What are you going to do? I need to underscore this point. The amendment made to Bill C-275 does not reflect the Senate's role of sober second thought, where it is to seek and improve legislation sent to us by the other chamber. Because this amendment was already considered by the other place and rejected. Moving this amendment again in this chamber is contrary to the clear will of the elected House. This is the kind of behavior that pours fuel on the fires of cynicism about the Senate's value and its role. This is, Senators, what leads to the call for the abolition of this institution, which refuses to acknowledge the will of the people and rebuffs the clear intent of the elected representatives. I have been as strong a defender of this institution as anybody here. But these are the kinds of things that lead all of us to say, if this is as good as we can be, then this chamber needs to shut down. Should this chamber decide to go this route, we will, in the minds of many Canadians, be living up to one senator's description of this place as not being a chamber of sober second thought, but rather a chamber of drunken second chances. That is what this will do, colleagues. Colleagues, I urge you, I implore you, I beg you to help the farming industry. We passed 2 bills here today because some of us didn't care that they were brought forward by independents or by Liberals, because we care about the legislation. We passed 2 bills just 2 days ago, Senator Colin Deakins and Senator Leo Housakis, because we didn't care who brought those bills forward, because we care about this country. That's what's happening here, colleagues. People are looking at it. Who's sponsoring that? Who's the critic? Plett's going to talk on that for 40 minutes, then I'm voting against it. Not because we should vote against it, but because, boy, he railed on me for so long, and now I'm angry at him, and now I'm going to vote against it for sure.
No, I'll vote for it.
Thank you. Thank you. I urge you, colleagues, to make the right choice today. Stand up with our producers. Stand up for our producers. Stand up with those who support them. Reject the report of the Senate Agricultural Committee on Bill C-275. Return the bill to the version which was overwhelmingly supported by the House of Commons and passed by them at third reading. Thank you, colleagues.
Hear, hear.